O kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. BHN with me, Pat, and with Chewy. Good evening, Chewy.
How you doing, mate?
Good, man. Hey, you are I was just talking to George last night about birthdays, and it's like the trifecta of birthdays. He was Monday last week, I was Tuesday, you were Saturday, and I feel like you've kind of won in the birthday game because you've been celebrating all week, bro.
Pretty much. Look, I really rate myself, and to just roll over and accept one day of celebrations just never sat right for me. So, in the past, I had Chew Stock, which was a week-long celebration of things that I like doing. And I guess this year was mini Chew Stock. I had some drinks with friends, had a nice night out. And me and my wife decided to get out of town and head to Queenstown a couple of days ago.
Beautiful.
Monday night through till yesterday. So we were there when it hits -7 degrees.
Yep. Did I see a Instagram or something from you going through the Crown Ranges and there being snow everywhere? Was that what I saw on
very
Facebook?
much so. Yeah. So my little dog Ilva is a Scandinavian dog, so we definitely want to go. This is snow. This is your heritage. And we throw her in a snowbank, and then her little short legs are very amusing. But she loves it. And it was just good to
show
hang
that
out.
Video. Are you up for
Yeah,
that? Are you okay
absolutely.
if that gets shown?
Yeah,
Let me
100%.
Let me find it. You keep talking and I'll try and find it.
So Queenstown seems to be doing pretty good. Construction everywhere. Not a lot of people wearing masks, which I thought was interesting in a tourist town. But yeah, that was like knee-deep snow everywhere. Just beautiful.
That's pretty cool. I tell you what, from being someone who grew up in the North Island and now living here in Dunedin, one of the absolute benefits of living in Dunedin is jumping in a car and getting up to Central Otago. Like it's right there. It's right there.
Oh, I love it. It's my favorite part of the country.
Yeah.
Just the landscape as you head up through Central and that sort of thing. Favorite areas just before you hit Alexandra, and you've got all of those sort of almost otherworldly rocks and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just love it.
There's this moment when you're driving up into Central and you're kind of going through Roxburgh and all those smaller townships on that highway, and you come to a particular corner that goes up and around, like goes up and it goes around to the left, to the right, sorry. And as soon as you go up and around it, you're in Central Otago Tussock. It's like when you're in the township, it's grass and it's green, and honestly, it must raise about another 20 meters because you go up and you go around, and then it's that classic tussock land, those rock formations that you see on Lord of the Rings and all the Taika Waititi films. It literally is. There's a corner and you're like, I'm in Otago. I'm in Central Otago. And you can just feel it's just like that. I love it. I can't wait.
But yeah, we got to do some touristy things. Did the luge.
Cool, man.
So shout out to my parents who one time didn't let me go on a luge in Rotorua. I finally got to do it.
Screw you, mum and dad. Screw you guys.
Yeah, keep me away from it.
There's that TikTok going around at the moment by a lot of people going, the problem is with not growing up or being an adult is I now have adult money, and it's all people with all their age of the boys by the price of their toys thing, because I'm not growing up, but I've got adult money now. So hey, well, it's good to have you back, bro. Thank you for coming on board tonight. Tonight is a bit of a different show. It's the last one for the week because, of course, tomorrow is Matariki. I'm very excited about Matariki. I'm very excited about the holiday. In the second half of this hour, we've got a couple of guests coming on from Otago Museum. We're going to be having a chat with the director of the museum, actually. He's also an astronomer and a discoverer of minor planets, is one of his claims to fame. His name is Ian Griffin, and we're going to talk to Ian about... how can I word this? Like the physical aspect to Matariki, the real world aspect. Tell us about the constellations. Tell us about the stars. Tell us about how to see them. So the more the physical element of it. And then we've got another person coming on from the museum, Tony Hueta, and she is going to talk to us about sort of the cultural aspect of Matariki, what Matariki means to Māori, what the story is of Matariki. Like, being honest with you, I don't know too much about what how with all Indigenous cultures they have stories to tell what's happening in the natural world. I didn't know what the story of Matariki was. I didn't know what the story of the stars were within the Māori culture, the myths and legends. And she tells us. So I've already had these
That's
conversations because you'll appreciate people who are celebrating Matariki tomorrow have got 5 a.m. starts. I know the museum is starting at 7 o'clock, and so they're all going to be up super, super early. So they were gracious enough to come on board this afternoon and have a bit of a chat with me. So those will be playing in the second half of the hour. We're also going to have a look this evening I have to be honest, it's a very quick touch on a very big topic because there's been some really big changes in the world of sport in the last 24 hours, especially around transgender athletes in sport. I think what I'm actually going to do, because this is a subject matter that's interested me for quite a long time, I've done several podcasts around it with experts. I've, talked to numerous people, including gold-winning, Olympians about what they think of the situation, and former black caps and scientists and all sorts of people about what it's all about, because I want to educate myself with this, what some seem to think is a very controversial issue. So we're not going to get into the weeds tonight, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to do a piece on it over the weekend. Like I want to gather all of my data together and probably do a piece on it over the weekend. And if you see that scrolling along the bottom of the screen, DOCNZ Studios at YouTube, if you make sure you subscribe to that now, or when you see this, then when I do that piece, you'll get notified. Oh, what do you have to do? You have to ring that bell. And then you'll be notified when we do it, if it is something that interests you. Because I tell you what, for probably the last, what would it be, Chewy, 5 years that this conversation's been going on, like for this decision to come out, it feels like it's been like, and all of a sudden there's a decision being made that kind of flips the whole conversation on its head. It's kind of weird actually that it's happened like that. So we're going to just touch on the decision really today. And then I'm sure this conversation will go on. So it's not going to be a big, deep and meaningful about the debate or anything like that. It's going to be looking at what the decision changes are. And then, as I said, like the YouTube channel, and you'll probably get me pulling some resources together to have a look at what that all means, I guess, from both my perspective and what I've learned. And obviously there are going to be many people who go, I shouldn't be talking about it, I'm not part of the community. Well, it's still something that's interested me. I've never been an All Black, and I still like commenting on, who should be playing halfback. So there you go. And also where we're going to start today is also first-time home buyers. Some really interesting news. Now, Chewy, you've just sold a place recently that we've talked about before, but the place that you're in right now, you already had owned, so you're not buying in this market, are you?
No. We sold the first house around Christmas time.
Yeah.
And I think, without being smug about it, we're pretty happy about the timing.
Yeah, for sure.
That we decided to go.
Especially if you don't have to buy again, because it doesn't really matter what's happening in the market. If you're selling and buying, you're in the same market. But if you're selling in a market that's higher and it's starting to drop away and you don't have to buy again, it's like that's a win-win, eh?
Yeah, one of my workmates has actually had to do that, selling a house and buying in this market at the same time.
Yeah.
And it just seemed incredibly complex because of the time pressures around it. Everybody wants now, apart from the buyer.
Yeah, of course, because the buyers are like, hey, it might be 10% cheaper next week.
Yeah.
And the sellers are like, I can't afford the house to go down anymore. Give me the money now.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
So, I mean, nobody's really had to deal with that. I have a real estate agent friend of mine that I was talking to over the weekend, and she's like, yeah, it's dramatically changed for her. Even if you go back a year, would you see a price on a real estate listing?
No, and you know what? I've been in Dunedin for coming up 9 years. And when I moved here and we bought our first house up in Waikari for $230,000, every house on the market had a price on it. And then the property value started going up, and you just saw almost week by week there'd be fewer houses with prices on them and fewer houses with prices on them, because what the agents are trying to do is get you to get as much money as they can for it, not just what they're asking for it. And now you're right. You look onto, I keep an eye on the market. You look at Trade Me or realestate.co.nz, and you're seeing prices on the houses again. So yeah, it's a very interesting time. It's a very interesting time.
That would be great, and that was what everybody was asking for. But what they haven't got is the interest rates to go with them.
And that's kind of what we're talking about. I'm going to play you a couple of clips from a conversation on the AM show this morning with Infometrics chief forecaster Gareth Keeman. He was talking on the AM show this morning. And then I also want to play you something that we actually talked about, not you and I, Chewy, but we being the show, talked about on this show 2 months ago. Because I'm not saying we were quite saying what they're saying today, which is there's actually a metric to it. They say it's the hardest it's been for 65 years for a first home buyer to get into their first home. Now, on top of that, though, later on in this piece, which we're not going to play, they also say that about 20% of purchases at the moment are first home buyers. I thought that sounded horrifically high. Not horrific like a bad thing, but surprisingly high. 1 in 5 houses being sold to a first home buyer sounds like a high percentage of first home buyers to me.
I mean, I must admit, when you said, hey, look, somebody reckons it's the worst time to buy houses in however many years, I was surprised about that. Like, I think with the amount of housing stock that's coming in, and the heat is clearly coming out of the market, some of the government regulations are starting to take effect. Hopefully, it should be good for the guys that have just been waiting for this to happen.
Yeah, well, I guess the
it
problem
just seems
is
almost cruel.
Yeah.
It almost seems cruel that the interest rates. I mean, I can understand why it's happened with everything going on in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I guess they also are now looking at it a bit more holistically. There's also cost of living, because when you go to the bank, you got to give them your budget and show you what you're spending. If you're now spending, I don't know, if you're earning $1,500 a week, or let's say you're earning $1,200 a week in your hand, but all of a sudden your food and petrol is costing you an extra $150 a week or $200 a week, then that's going to make it more difficult for you to get approval than perhaps 12, 18 months ago. So maybe the overall situation is like people are going to go straight away back to the 80s when like my parents or my grandparents or whatever had 18 or 20% interest rates. Surely it was worse then. They actually addressed that in this conversation, and we're going to play that clip as to why it's worse now for first home buyers than it was back then. So why don't we do that? Why don't we get into it? And the first part is actually the actual explanation of what we're talking about. So looking at the worst time to buy homes in 65 years, for first home buyers is what we're talking about. And I think what we've just said, which is if you're buying and selling in the same market, you don't get hit quite so bad. But if you're a first time home buyer and you need a $200,000 deposit, how the crap are you going to have that as a first home buyer, or whatever it is? It's more problematic. So let's just have a listen to that first of all, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, house prices have risen so far that you need a big deposit to get into the market, and the risk is that over the next 25 years you're devoting a massive proportion of your income to actually servicing that mortgage, which means that you're not going to have a lot of money to spare to left over for other things. And the risk is also at the moment, as we're seeing house prices fall, you could be paying too much for property, so you're not going to be enjoying the capital gains and price appreciation that previous generations have as well.
Okay, so is this just about house prices, or is this mainly now about mortgage rates, interest rates going up as well?
No, it's primarily house prices. I mean, we saw through 2020 and 2021 with mortgage rates falling down to below 2.5%, that house prices responded to that, and people said, well, I can service a larger mortgage because interest rates are so low. But that's not the main part of the story. The affordability crisis has really been building for 30 or 40 years as house prices have continued to run well ahead of incomes, meaning that it's just got more and more unaffordable for people trying to get onto the ladder.
Okay.
So he's actually saying it's the perfect storm, that with the interest rates going up, house prices haven't come down enough. So in other words, even though some house prices have come down arguably between 5 and 20%, depending on where you are in the country and what house you particularly own, they still haven't dropped to a level to offset those interest rates. And I can actually demonstrate this to you a bit later on when we talked about this. I'm not going to actually play that part of the conversation, but I know I did the numbers on a $770,000 mortgage. And I know with the interest rates between today and 12 months ago, well, it wasn't even today, interest rates are probably more today, but the interest rate 2 months ago versus 12 months before that, that $770,000 mortgage, so let's say that's $1 million house, a $950,000 house, has to drop to about a $550,000 mortgage. So it has to drop by $200K before that actually offsets, before the mortgage rates today would give you a lesser payment than that more expensive house on mortgage rates last year. So it's actually, if it drops by 10% or 70 grand, you're still so much worse off. And so I guess what the economist is saying is, because of those high house prices, even though they've come down, they're still much higher than the offset would need to be for interest rates. The prices of the houses are still the driving factor, even though interest rates have gone up as well.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing. And like, I remember, before I moved to Dunedin, economists were going, "Oh, interest rates won't stay here. They won't be this cheap forever," and they just kept on going down and down and down. Now,
COVID was a big part of that, though, eh?
Yeah, but I'm talking way before that.
Yeah.
I'm talking. When did I move down here? 2017, I think it was. And at that point, I think interest rates were pretty much around roughly where they may be now.
Right.
And economists going, this won't last.
Yeah.
These glory days of low interest rates won't last. And then they kept on going down.
Yeah.
And then we had COVID. And then we had a pretty worrying war in the Northern Hemisphere affecting oil and food production, and then everything's just spiked. Inflation's gone crazy.
Yeah.
And that's sort of added pressure into it. From everything that I've read, there's an enormous amount of housing coming on stream, more than we've had in years and years and years. And if it wasn't for the external influences, we might be looking at exactly what people were asking for. But the shit you just can't control, and the timing of it is just rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, when you say the timing of it's rubbish, I agree with you based on where we're at. But probably the timing of it has to do with where we're at as well. The inflationary pressures, the OCR, international, borrowing international money is all a part of where we're at today. So it feels like it's a double whammy, but I wonder if it's more symptomatic of where we're at anyway. So it's always going to happen when we're in this situation, because this situation causes that kind of expense for interest rates.
I guess what I would wonder is, like, if we have got all of this housing stock, all of these new builds that have been consented and all of that sort of thing coming on stream, and people sitting on a whole bunch of investment properties going, nah, too hard to keep this to code, flick it on, all of those guys going out, is that going to, I guess, happen quicker than interest rates to trend upwards and then come back down again? What's going to have the quicker effect for people?
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess the question is, how much do house prices have to dip for the first home buyers?
Yeah.
And how much pressure is that going to put on people that maybe bought right at the tippy top?
Yep.
And leverage to their eyeballs to go into negative equity. I've heard stories from people over in the UK when a very similar thing. People would just go into the bank and drop their keys off and walk away.
Yeah.
It wasn't worth their mortgage payments at that point.
Yeah,
so
and
it's a pretty fine line.
That's always been the problem that I've put back to politicians when they've always talked about we need to cool this housing market off. We need to, houses need to be more affordable. The question I've asked every single politician I've ever interviewed around that is, so when you do that, all those first-time home buyers who have a 95% mortgage, and then the housing price, market drops by 10%, then all of a sudden they're a negative 5% equity, and the the bank actually closes down their mortgage. Then what? And there's never really been a good answer, because there isn't a good answer. It's like either houses become cheaper and a whole bunch of people who have super mortgages, either go bankrupt or lose money or lose houses, or the banks take the hit, one of the way, or they stay where they are, and it's what some people think is an overinflated, over expensive market. It doesn't seem to be a middle ground. Someone's got to lose somewhere. And I guess, like, just being blunt, if you're a homeowner, you probably go for the latter. You'd rather have, more money in your house and be it harder for first home buyers. And if you don't have a house, you probably want those people who own houses to lose 20% of their equity.
Yeah, I mean, I've told you how fucking horrible my situation was at the start of the year, with the bank really pulling the rug out from under me by going, hey, look, we're going to take some of the profits from your house sale. We're going to take half of it to pay down your mortgage. and then just did it on the day of settlement, which was my whole issue. But if I was to be completely honest, my wife and I are sitting back going, well, halving our mortgage, even if they did do it the wrong way, has probably benefited us quite a bit at this point.
Yeah. All right. Just a couple of messages that have come in before we keep going. Actually, both from Pulakiwi, who I think is in Dunedin. We'll never be able to keep the status quo going forever. Prices will collapse at some point, regardless. I don't know if I agree with that about collapsing. Collapsing to me feels like almost houses become worthless. I know that may not be the word that Pulakiwi is mentioning, but I don't know if that will be the case because, and you can base evidence based on what has happened. And, there have been times where there's been corrections and an increase, corrections and an increase. I mean, any commodity is not going to be the same price in 20 years as it is today, whether it's a can of Coke or a house. Prices go up, things become more expensive, we earn more. Whether it's more expensive in real money or just more expensive based on what people are earning then, you don't tend to see house prices dropping anywhere. They can stabilize, they can come down for a bit, but typically they increase. And I guess what I'm saying, that's how it's always happened. So I don't know if I agree with it'll collapse at some point. Unless what we're saying is it'll collapse at some point and then recover. It seems there's always an upward trend at some stage, in my opinion. Also, Pulakiwi says, I won't have to worry about the housing market personally, though I can see my breath inside my flat. So naturally, things are going great. So let's have a look at the second part of this, because this is part of the conversation where they talk about, wasn't it more expensive in the 80s? And it's only a 30-second clip, but explains something quite interesting that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, look, the thing about buying in 1987 with those interest rates of 20%, inflation was also high at that point in time, so your income rose pretty rapidly. By the time you were finishing paying off your mortgage, it was taking less than 10% of your income to meet that mortgage. When we look forward from here, for a current buyer, in 2046, they could still be paying 22% of their mortgage, 22% of their income, more than twice as much as your parents, and certainly worse than your grandparents as well. So yes, in my view, it's definitively worse for your current first-home buyer.
So I'd never heard that before, but when they're talking about how bad it is for first-home buyers, they're also projecting what the payments are going to be. So again, he was saying that, in 25 years from now, you are projected, and I guess that is based on averages, so it won't be everybody, but on average, people will still be paying 22% of their income on their mortgage, whereas in our parents' and grandparents' time, by that stage, they're only paying 10% of their income on their mortgage. So again, let's just quote the National Party and talk about the squeezed middle. You know what I'm saying?
I had a quite interesting conversation with my mum about this. So my parents bought their house in 1980
for $8.50.
And interestingly enough, my dad had been in the army, so they had a serviceman's loan that they could access and that sort of thing. And mum was talking about, interest rates, they weren't even that high. Well, they're not that high now. They're heaps higher back in the day. And I was like, righto. And I brought out an inflation calculator. And I was like, cool. So how much was your house worth? And how much were your mortgage payments? Yeah. And mortgage payments, I thought she'd said fortnightly, but were actually monthly.
Right.
And she was like, oh, the payments are so high. And I was like, Mum, that's half of what what I'm paying now.
Yeah.
And you were fortnightly, and you were paying it monthly.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let's look at some other stuff. How much was, how much was a bottle of milk? Can you remember that?
8p.
And she goes, I can't remember that, but I can remember your father coming back angry about a price rise in a container of ice cream. And he said he'd be buggered if he'd pay more than $2.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we just went through all of these things and just compared what it was inflationary, what stayed the same, what changed, all of that sort of thing. And I think it was quite eye-opening. And when you turn around and go, and how much did you get paid?
There's a number. I don't have it to hand, but it was something like up until the 1980s, the average house was 3 times the average wage, or 4 times the average wage, or 5 times the average wage, whatever it was. And now it's like 10 times the average wage. So that's exactly what you're saying. If you want to compare apples to apples, compared to the average wage, it's exponentially worse now. And actually, Kim gives us an example of that. Our house has doubled in price since 2015. Our wages haven't doubled. Yep. So, of course, that's exactly the point with this housing market that we're talking about.
You know, and it goes back to our high cost of living here, and I'm not talking about National's cost of living crisis. I'm just saying, generally, normally, New Zealand has quite a high cost of living. We're a small island, miles away from anywhere, and we send all of our good shit overseas. Things are expensive here, but our wages traditionally haven't, and it causes a whole bunch of problems. And nobody's really got the solution. You know, you can't just go, all right, well, minimum wage is now $27.50. It still doesn't solve any of those things. Everything's interconnected, and nobody wants it to be interconnected. They want to solve a problem.
Could a government, this is going to be a bit controversial. Well, it's not really, because I can't do anything about it. I better not say this out loud, because then it might happen, Chewy. No, you know, you talk about tariffs on imports. Could you whack a massive tariff on exports? In other words, could you make it for Fonterra that it's not worth sending as much stuff offshore, like it's better for them to sell it here in New Zealand? In other words, you know, they talk about us being the kind of producer of dairy for the world or whatever. Whatever the item is there charges for exporting food from the government? Could a government make it more attractive to keep your product in New Zealand than send it offshore?
Well, I don't know.
No, I don't know either.
But I mean, I think I made a sort of similar comment a few weeks back of like, maybe this is something where the government needs to step in and go, all right, you have to reserve a section of what you produce for the domestic market, and it can't be sold anywhere else.
Yeah.
So that whole argument of like, well, and I don't even think it's a great argument, that the whole thing of like, oh, well, we have to charge the same prices as what we can get overseas for the product because it's the same product.
Yeah.
But there's so many instances of people getting New Zealand product overseas for cheaper than what we get it here. And I don't know if that's the classic case of comparing something that's on special in Australia or Hong Kong or wherever compared to full price here. I don't know. But there's enough instances of it appearing in people's comments and in the papers and stuff. It does make you wonder. I got a New Zealand steak in Kuala Lumpur once for $8. And I remember, what the fuck? I never, you know, how was that possible? It had to get here.
Well, that's the other thing, because, like, I mean, not to pick on Fonterra, but let's just talk about Fonterra. You know, if they've got cheese, I mean, the example I always remember from Talkback was people listening in Perth, and I think because the time difference was so significant that when I was doing a midnight shift, it was like 4 in the afternoon or something in Perth. I can't remember exactly what it was. Let's check out, shall we? Hang on, let's do this. Hey Siri.
Yeah.
What's the time in Perth right now?
It's 18:31 in Perth, Australia.
So what is that? It's 4 hours. Okay, so it would have been evening. For middle of the night would have been sort of evening over there. And I used to get messages from Perth talking about how cheap their Anchor milk was, or their New Zealand butter, or their whatever. And I think about that. I think about, you know, from Fonterra to the Cambridge dairy, or to something like that, versus the air miles and the distance. That supermarket that's in Perth and probably through the whole country must have to buy millions or tens of millions of products to either make it cheaper than we can get it for just down the road, or we're just being absolutely ripped off by these companies because they can. Because I think about Hawaii, and the cost of living in Hawaii is hugely expensive because they've turned their economy into being reliant on the mainland. They can't produce enough food within Hawaii to provide for Hawaii, so they bring food in, so everything's more expensive. Now, is it that everything is more expensive to have in New Zealand, or are groups like Fonterra, and I don't want to pick on them, Silverfern Farms, pick your own New Zealand company who does a lot of exporting, are they just gilding the lily because they know they can here in New Zealand, rather than that's actually what they need to charge? I don't know the answer to that, but they're my thoughts.
Yep. Look, I think we do have a problem with much larger companies just becoming almost a pseudo monopoly. You've got the stuff with Fletcher's and Jibboard and Fonterra and milk and all of that sort of stuff. That's the supermarkets. It's all stuff that we've been banging on about. And we've got to this part of the conversation from starting talking about houses. Everything is linked together.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to look at what's a holistic answer to everything. We need to have a crack at everything all at once rather than one crisis of the day.
Yeah. And look, because we've done that, I'm actually not going to play the last clip I was going to play, but I'll show you what it was. Isn't that weird? I'm watching me. How bizarre is that? Because I'll just explain what I did. I've sort of already explained it. I took a $770,000 mortgage based on a interest rate of last year, 12 months ago, 2.5%. So I did this in April, and it came out at $3,000 a month. I then made it a $700,000 mortgage, which is 10%, which is what we were talking about then. I put it at 5% interest, which is the average interest rate of the time, and it came out at $3,700 a month. So whilst the house price had dropped down by $70,000 because of the interest rate, the payments had gone up by $700 a month. So what this is being talked about now, that it's the worst in 65 years, and we didn't have that exact comment back then, but here in this show we've been talking about this for a little while, and all the people are going, yay, house prices are falling, isn't it better for first time home buyers? Well, no, and now it's official. It's hasn't been as bad as this for 65 years, for 6 decades. Probably most of us are talking about since our grandparents bought homes. So
I mean, I think one point that I want to make, and this was my annoyance when I bought my house, and it's still an annoyance when I hear other people's stories, is when you go to the bank and they look at your income and your debt levels and what they're willing to lend you. One thing that just does not factor in is the fact that most people are paying in rent more than what they would be paying for their mortgage. And I think that's a tipping point. I wish the banks would take that. Oh, clearly you pay your rent every week and that's your rent, and you could service a mortgage. I think the tipping point for a lot of people would be that point where you're paying less rent than what you would be paying for a mortgage.
Yeah, I remember.
Thanks to landlords, we're not there yet.
That's exactly what I mean. We I don't know if you or I have talked about this, mate, but I've said before, it always confused me when I was first trying to buy a house, like paying at that stage, paying $400 a week mortgage, rent. The mortgage would be $300. No, sorry, you don't qualify. We can't. Yeah. We can't help you. Sorry, I
couldn't believe it when I bought my first house. I was like, what do I do with all of this money? And the answer was, your house is broken and you need to fix it.
Well, that's what it is. It's all those other expenses on top. But anyway, hey, let's have a look at this other one. Now, look, I'll say again, if you're just joining us now, this is not going to be a focus of conversation for tonight, a debate around this, although I do want to play a little piece of commentary that I had with a physiologist when I had them on for a podcast. But the thing that's interesting about this is it's FINA. FINA is the governing body for swimming. They've just come out and they've changed the rule on transgender athletes, just like that. Boom, it's changed. And since they've done that, I guess it's FIFA, one of the football organisations. I don't think they've made decisions yet, but they've acknowledged they're going to look into it, as has cycling as well. So there's a bit of a sea change coming, it would seem, for transgender. And look, I was going to say athletes. I don't want to sound like a fucking boomer or something, but it's transgender women in sport. This is not a conversation around transgender men in sport, but the overall topic is about transgender athletes in sports. And in my opinion, the reason it's not about men is that men don't have that same, and I'll say apparent, to be fair, advantage against transgender men. Don't seem to have that same apparent advantage against biological men as the other way around. And that's why you always hear about transgender women in sports, but technically it's about transgender athletes, as the item says. So we're not even going to really play any of the content from the conversation here, because I think what I'll do over the weekend is I'll do a bit of a deep dive into this. But because I think this is quite, when I say shocking, I don't mean, oh my God, I'm so shocked. I'm like, it's surprising to me that this decision seems to be made so quickly and easily compared to the level of debate there's been for the last, let's say, 5 years. So if you haven't heard this yet, we'll let you know what's happened in the swimming world and potentially flowing on into other areas of elite, and that's an important part, elite sport.
Can fairness and inclusion coexist in sports? Should transgender athletes be allowed to compete in the category they identify as? It's been the topic of tricky debate in recent years, especially with our very own Laurel Hubbard making history, competing in women's weightlifting at the Tokyo Olympics. But it's decision time for sports. The governing body of world swimming is effectively banning participation of transgender athletes in elite women's competitions, instead looking to create an open category.
So this has got more to go, but just think about that. What was it, Chewy? Within the last 2 months, the Leah Thomas story around the world, like and within and like, you know, I don't want to pass commentary on Leah Thomas per se, but you know, the celebration by many at this incredible achievement and all that, and then within 2 months, I guess it means if this is as we hear it, Leah Thomas won't be competing at next year's NCAA competition based on what we know what Fien has done. But that's what I'm saying. It's just changed like that. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the thing that surprises me is it's changed just so quickly like that. Let's just get the end of this. There's about another 30 seconds to play. It's just the introduction we're playing to give people the information.
The policy's been slammed as deeply discriminatory, harmful and unscientific by one LGBT plus group. But it hasn't stopped other sports from thinking about the issue. A day after the swimming decision, World Football's governing body said it was reviewing its policies around transgender athletes, taking guidance from medical, legal, scientific, performance and human rights experts. Meanwhile, cycling is enforcing stricter limits on transgender athletes. Changing its policy will force riders to wait longer before they can compete, increasing the transition period on low testosterone from 1 year to 2, and lowering the maximum accepted level of testosterone.
There you go. So that's the introduction to the story. What I might do is I could put that on mute in the background and then hit play, and then if people want to keep watching the stuff that they're saying, they can. Of course, unless you are listening to us on our daily audio podcast. There's a couple of things before we get into a bit of a conversation around this change. It's fascinating, this report by TVNZ. The first thing is, from as soon as they actually uploaded it, which was I saw it upload, so I kind of caught it when it was fresh. The comments have been turned off. I don't know whether that's commentary on kind of trolls and terrible people on the internet, or whether that's commentary on TVNZ not wanting to get into a controversial toing and froing on this. But there's been no ability for anyone to comment on this video.
I got to say that it's the right call.
Okay.
Any topic like this turns into an absolute petri dish of some of the internet's worst people. It's not a fucking conversation. Nobody's having a discussion that's going to move someone's point of view on that one. It is just usually some of the scummiest, most harmful comments you can see on it. And unless, like, my opinion on something like that is, unless they're going to put a moderator in there and keep it in track. If you can't control it, then don't do it. You know, I'd say that for stuff on Facebook and that sort of thing, for the news sites that have just gone, you know, we're not going to have a comment section on our stories. That's a good idea.
All right.
You know, just personally.
I would err on the other side, but I can completely accept your point as well. I guess what I'm saying is, if someone made that decision, I can completely understand why. I guess if it was my content, I wouldn't do that. But then I'm not TVNZ, who has to abide by a charter and involved with government money. So maybe there's a part of them protecting all that.
I can see where you're coming from there. I mean, you see any transgender comment story about transgender topics, you see brigading from the turf folks from all over the world.
So one of the things I thought was interesting about this story as well, I mean, you said something interesting, I wrote it down as you said it, you know, no one's going to move a point of view, you know, no one's going to be convinced of a point of view in the comments, you know, it's just going to be a big argument, and no one's going to sort of educate one another or, you know, offer insightful positions to one another to try and move the needle in a sensible way.
I mean, I love a comment section fight, but I know that I'm not changing minds. I'm not doing hearts and minds. I'm doing combat. And it's fine because I like having an argument.
But that point that you made, it makes me even more interested as to how TVNZ set up this story. Because on this story, if you're watching right now, what you're seeing is a transgender woman who is a cyclist, I think a mountain biker from memory, and she's sharing her perspective, obviously, as to being not a fan of this decision and not thinking it's fair. And the face that you saw roll across before as an academic out of Waikato who is in a very similar position, you know, an advocate for the transgender community, thinking that this is a discriminatory and, you know, harmful position that FINA has made. Now, I'm just interested, and I guess it's not a criticism, it's more interesting that TVNZ didn't choose to have any kind of opposing thought on this at all. It was just purely both positions of their guests were from the same side and the comments were turned off. I'm intrigued as to the programming decision, not even necessarily because you can have on whoever you want. I mean, obviously, I did a conversation with someone on Monday night where we talked about the dairy industry, and I was getting criticisms from people not giving someone enough space to talk. And I said, and I actually wrote it in one, and then I deleted it. That's what I do. My passive aggressive nature is I write things back and they go, oh no. And one of them was, look, I look forward to you getting your own broadcast and hosting your show the way you want to, but for now I'll do it my way. But then I deleted it. I didn't put it in there. So I don't have any problems with editorial decisions being made, but I'm intrigued as to why. So this is not really a conversation, just to base it on what you said about the comments, Chewy, that's going to move a needle or move to a new point of view. So therefore, from a news agency, what is it? And I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah. I mean, I like, I guess, tell me the story and let me make up my own mind. And a lot of that time it is both sides of it. But I mean, have we heard, you know, devil's advocate, too much from people on one side of that argument in the lead up to this?
I don't know. I mean, I personally, I don't think necessarily.
I couldn't say one way or the other. Just saying.
So, not to get caught up in the mire about the actual debate, I wanted to play one thing because, look, I don't want to sound like, you know, I've got all the answers, because I don't. That would be really arrogant, especially from someone not really, certainly not being involved in that world. But to me, it feels like, and I've said this for a long time, and you may have heard me say this, Chewy, I may have said it to you when we've been on, is that either side of this debate are talking across each other. And I really feel like until we actually come to an agreement, even on the terms that we're using, how can we even have a conversation around it? Like, and the example I often use is the birth certificate bill, where people can now self-identify their own sex. Once it passed, the MP who put it through got up and made a speech in Parliament saying, finally, people can now identify on their birth certificate with the gender that they adhere to. And I was like, hang on, but that's not the law that you've just changed. Gender's not on your birth certificate, it's sex. So the words sex and gender are being used in different ways by either side. And I think until we even get to an agreement there, we can't have the conversation. I'm comfortable saying that I think it's almost unquestionable that there is a physical advantage from someone who was born biologically a male and competing as a female. For me, that's not the conversation. For me, the conversation, whether people agree with me or disagree with me, and I'm happy to take criticism, is if there is an advantage, are we okay? Do we agree with people then competing in the sport together? Like, let's get that definitive answer if there's an advantage or not. And once we have that definitive answer, we can have the next conversation is, now what about all these women competing together? You know, but we're not even there. We're not even at that part of the conversation to flow on. And I did want to play this because I thought this was really interesting. I had a conversation, 2 years ago, Dr. Lindley Anderson and Dr. Alison Heather from Otago University. Alison Heather is in the Department of Physiology. And for people who aren't quite clear on that, physiology is how the body works, right? That's what it's about. It's the science of the anatomy and how the body works. And she tells a very quick story here that I want to play about levels of estrogen and testosterone and how they... if you lose all your testosterone, you can still keep some of the benefits from that you gained when you had testosterone. I'll just play it and then we'll leave it at that and we'll move on to the next thing and people can respond as they will. So this is asking Alison Heather about when people transition male to female. It's a question around muscle mass in particular to a person who is a professor in the physiology department. And I was listening to a podcast the other day and they said that there's some new research coming out at the moment that after 12 months of transitioning, both male to female or female to male, a lot of their strengths, etc., haven't changed by that much. Is that as you understand it?
Yeah, that's true. So if you lower your testosterone levels as in a trans female, remembering that the IOC, so the International Olympic Committee, only...
So I'm going to talk over it because this part is, I think, a little bit yesterday's news. She's talking about 10 nanomoles per liter. I think it's now 5, so that's not the case anymore. The main point I want to get to is when she explains what happens when a male physiology goes to 0%, I just talked over the answer, goes to like 0% testosterone, and there's an example for that.
And you're still training, it's not going to have molar, which is still 10-fold higher than the average for a cis female. If you're sitting at around 8 or 9 nanomolar of testosterone and you're still training, it's not going to have it's not going to have much effect on your muscle mass at all. There's the memory effect of muscle as well as the training effect on muscle, and the fact that you've still got some testosterone there to help keep that muscle mass there.
Yeah.
And we know that not just from trans females, or we know that from males that have prostate cancer. So if males have prostate cancer, one of the treatments that they go on to is called androgen deprivation therapy. So they lower their testosterone to they try and get it to 0, like as low as they can. And that we know that if those patients train, if they go to the gym and train, they don't lose very much muscle mass over that whole 12-month period of treatment.
So what she's saying is if a male physiology, biologically born a male, has no testosterone in their body, yet keeps training at the same level, they basically don't lose very much muscle mass at all. So it's just a really interesting, I'd never heard it before she said it, and I like to put out information for people. I think for me it feels like that's an argument towards this idea that there is an advantage, and I'm not actually using that like the right use that as a sharpened tool and a weapon. I'm just going, let's just talk about the facts of it, and then once we have the facts down, let's then spread it out to how we're then going to deal with that within society.
Yeah, I mean, I'm treating this subject like a goddamn minefield. I am a supporter of trans rights. I believe that people should be the people they want to be.
I agree.
I don't think there's any harm in that. But then you've got to unpack the social stuff with, as you said, the physiological stuff. And I think what is it? Whatever the governing body of that has made this decision.
Swimming, FINA.
That they've come up and said, hey, look, we're going to have an open category. I think that's not a bad idea. I see in the comments there, what about having a trans male and trans female category for sport as well? I don't think that that's necessarily a bad idea either. And I think the other part of their decision was that they said, they put a line in the sand of the age of transition being important.
Yeah.
So obviously they believe that puberty's quite important. They've said, like, if you've transitioned, you started transition around the age of 12, then it shouldn't really make too much of an impact on you. You don't get that advantage if you were male transitioning to female at the age of around 12.
Just only because I've spoken to the physiologist a couple of times on that podcast. There's 3 stages the male physiology gets a testosterone boost. 1 is in vitro. Obviously, they're always going to get that. 2 is in the first 2 years of life. The 3rd time is in puberty. Obviously, the puberty is the biggest hit.
So they're focusing on that 3rd one. Yeah.
But the first 2 do things like the hips, do things like it was really funny speaking to a female, albeit an academic, and she was talking about how women throw like a girl, and she was talking about the ratio between the elbow and the hip actually means that women have to have their elbow a little bit wider to throw something. Now, that's skeletal, right? That doesn't change
biomechanics.
So that doesn't change. That doesn't change when you so those sorts of things are always going to be there.
And yeah, so I mean, there's things. Again, there's the social aspects of it. You know, and I truly believe that we'll treat the transition issue in, you know, 10, 15, 20 years very much the same way that we've treated you know, gay and lesbian folk as well, is that it just becomes increasingly less and less of an issue socially as we move forward. It's little steps and it all adds up. But then when you look at sport and performance, there, you know, I can definitely see that there are possibly at this stage unsolvable issues, biomechanical issues of how the
100%.
body works. So,
but that's what I'm saying. It's like if we acknowledge
the
those...
problem is, how do we make that sport more inclusive?
We're actually there, though. You and me are basically saying the same thing. I mean, like, for example, men have more density in their bones. And one of the interesting things is when you start taking estrogen, it allows you to hold on to that bone density. So when you look at things like a striking sport, that has a lot to do with bones being thrown at and towards each other, so it can make a difference. A kicking sport can be the same. I agree with you, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make as well, Chewy, is that how do we do this? Is what I'm saying. How do we do this? I'm saying let's settle the science first, and then let's go. Now the science is settled, and I think the science will probably show there's an advantage for trans women. Yeah, but then let's decide how that works.
See, that's the other thing. It bleeds into the other issue, and I guess that's what I have trouble with. Is if you just go, see, biomechanically, men are men. You'll have someone go, men are men. They can never be women. Science, the sporting body agrees. And
yeah, no, I think you'll get fuckwits that say that.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
But you're going to get those same fuckwits saying it no matter what anyway. The whole time. I also think it's there is quite a simple result here, is that, and this is the whole thing about sex and gender not being, put into the same term, that they're different terms, gender, social construct, sex, biological. Sex is the hardware, gender is the software, that sort of thing. Then sports can be based on sex. And that conversation's over. So therefore you can be a male and a woman. Because the social entity of it is woman, the biological or the sex entity of it is male. And I watch a lot of videos from transgender activists and stuff online, and without question, they all explain that there is a difference between sex and gender. The trans community say sex is biological, gender is a social construct. So why don't we just do that in sports? Easy. It's easy. I mean, it sounds ridiculous me saying it's an easy solution, but that just seems like an easy solution. So there's now male swimming. And there's female swimming, and that gets away from men and women swimming, because it's the men tag and the woman tag that seems to be the issue, not the male and the female.
I'll tell you this right now. We're not going to have solutions just by changing a name.
No, that's true.
Taking the piss, Pat.
Although I do remember when the ridiculous bathroom bills all came out, it seemed pretty simple. You just put unisex on the door, and that solved all of those issues anyway. So a name change can just do it sometimes. Yeah. But look, anyway.
And look, I'll come back to one thing that I've always said about the Olympics. Just get rid of every category. Get rid of drug testing. Let's see how far the human body will go. Augmentations, drugs. Don't worry about gender, sex, whatever. Let's throw them all in a pool and see who can swim the fastest.
Well, that's actually something else. I was talking to someone about. I was talking to someone.
The True Open.
The movie. It's a what is it called? It's a space movie where they go and fight big insects on other planets. Starship Troopers. And I remember being a bit shocked as a teenager when all the men and women were showering in the same space in the movie. And you're like, well, that's a different future, but that's the future they had, which was they don't treat the sexes as any different. I do want to say one other thing though, and this is what I might go into. We're talking about a deep dive later on, and look, we've been going for half an hour, bro. I do want to say one other thing about that though, is I think also the language that we're using, we need to be aware that sometimes words that are used negatively aren't necessarily negative. So the point was, it's discriminatory. And the reality is, yes, it is. That's happening in sports all the time. There are age group discriminations. There are sex and gender discriminations. There are weight class discriminations. Like if you're in boxing and you're 67 kgs, you're in one class. If you're 68, you have to be in the other class. So the discriminatory thing is fine and accurate, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong and bad. And I'm saying doesn't necessarily mean, because we have discrimination all the time. If you're 4, you can't go to the Masters Games. If you're 35, you can. You know, so discrimination is a part of sport. Lines are drawn in the sand all over the place for sport. The question is there going to be another line here? I guess that's my last question. All right, dude. Hey, listen, I'm going to go on and play these interviews now. These interviews are actually already on YouTube because in Matariki, I've already actually uploaded them, so they're there. So I'm assuming you're going to go off and see your lovely wife and have a semi-early night, even though we've been going for too long already.
I know she's doing her coursework, and if I bother her, she'll stab me. So,
right. Well, you can do whatever you want. Are you going to stay? You're going to go? Should I stay or should I go?
I'll be floating around. I'll probably there's quite a good conversation going on in the chat, so I might join that.
Well, then stay with us. Stay on camera as well. And we won't be on camera for this because right now we're going to talk about Matariki. And the first conversation we're going to have, we've got two quick conversations here, is with the director of Otago Museum. His name is Ian Griffin. He is an astronomer. And I wanted to talk to him more about the physical world with Matariki, i.e. tell me about star constellations. Tell me about what's actually happening in the celestial world when it comes to Matariki and the stars. And so here's Ian Griffin. Welcome to the show, Ian Griffin. Ian Griffin is a New Zealand astronomer and currently the director of Otago Museum here in Dunedin. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Pat. How are you doing?
Good, although your window behind us kind of gives us a bit away that this is a pre-record, because evening when we play this, afternoon when we speak. But thank you for giving us a few minutes. I'm sure today, the day before Matariki, what is it? Matariki Eve? Has that been said at all in your offices?
I think everybody's taking Matariki very seriously here today, so it's Matariki all round.
We'll have a look at what the museum is doing tomorrow. So if people are in Dunedin, they can come along, or they can enjoy what you guys are doing. And obviously, if they're not, I suspect they'll be able to see it online anyway. But what I wanted to talk to you about in your capacity as an astronomer and a discoverer of minor planets, because for people who don't know, I've spoken to you on my podcast before, so we've had a big chat about that kind of exciting thing, is possibly more to do with the physical world and more to do with what Matariki is in the physical world, i.e. looking up into the sky and seeing the stars and what we're seeing. And I don't know, maybe what it signifies. I guess maybe that is not the physical world, but in general, looking at that aspect of it. So what can you tell us about what we are now referencing as Matariki?
Well, what I absolutely love about this new public holiday is it's based on actually observing the sky. Because in Maori culture, they had wise astronomers who basically figured out that when you saw Matariki rise before the sun, that was pretty much the middle of winter and the new year was going to begin. And it really does show that the Maori and their Polynesian ancestors were really talented scientists. They were people who went out and observed the world around them and used those observations to understand their local part of the cosmos. So from I guess you call it a Western astronomical perspective, I would call this the helical rising of the Pleiades, or the star cluster which the Maori know as Matariki. And that means simply the earliest time you can see it when it emerges from the twilight in the morning. Now, the sun moves around the sky during the course of the year. You know, in winter, it's here in New Zealand anyway, it rises quite a long way north of east, and it never gets more than about 30 degrees high here in Dunedin, and then sets north of west.
Right. Yep.
And then in summer, you go out and it sets way south of, rises way south of east, gets really high in the sky, nearly 70 degrees high, and sets well to the south. And that's why we get nearly 17 hours of daytime here in the summer and only about 8 and a bit hours in the winter. So the sun appears to move around the sky, but it's not actually the sun that's moving, it's us. Our planet is orbiting the sun. And what that means is different bits of the sky get blasted out over the course of the year by sunlight.
Right.
So Matariki appears and it rises 4 minutes earlier every day. And slowly over the course of the next 6 months, it'll move through the sky, or seem to move through the sky. So it rises earlier. And then by summertime, Matariki will be disappearing into the evening sky. So I really think this is a fabulous thing. We're actually celebrating talented observers seeing this astronomical phenomenon and using it as a start date in their calendar. Now, also, Matariki itself is a fascinating object. It's very distinct. You can see it pretty much all over the world. In fact, Antarctica is about the only place in the world where you can't see it. And it's really distinct. It's what astronomers call an open cluster of stars. There's probably around 1,000 or so stars gravitationally bound to each other. And the human eye can't see 1,000 stars. We can see, and it depends how good your eyesight is and how dark the site you're looking at. But some people have been said to be able to see about 12 of these stars.
Wow.
In Greek culture, they were known as Matariki. They were known as the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters.
Yep.
And of course, cultures around the world have got names for this star cluster. The Japanese call it Subaru, and that's why the Subaru cars have basically an image of the Pleiades on their bonnet. So it is a very noticeable cluster of stars. It's very distinct, and even in the middle of a city, where the lights are there, you can see Matariki when it's reasonably high in the sky. So it's not surprising, really, that a culture that didn't necessarily know that you're looking at a gravitationally bound group of stars would notice that it's a very pretty group of stars and it's distinct, and would make up stories and legends around it and attach it to their culture. So it's one of the things I really love about Matariki this year is absolutely it's a celebration of Maori culture, but it's also a celebration of the human spirit and our ability to observe the sky and make sense of the world that we live in.
One can only imagine as well, 200, 300, 500 years ago, what the night sky would have been without the light pollution we have and stuff today as well. So probably even more recognizable and easier to use as a locator back when there weren't cities shedding a ton of light up into the atmosphere as well.
That's absolutely right. In fact, we're very lucky in New Zealand. Probably only maybe Auckland and Christchurch and Wellington are really, really badly polluted. Even from the centre of Dunedin, you can see a decent night sky and see the Milky Way. But I was out the other morning. I've been going out every morning to look at Matariki. And you can see it, last Sunday, it was just about visible just before, not before sunrise, but as the sky got bright, you could just about see it. And by tomorrow morning, it's going to be dead easy. One of the things that's interesting this year, though, is if you do go out and try and see it in the morning sky, you will notice that there's this kind of red-purple haze before dawn, and that's nothing to do with Matariki. It's caused by the Tongan volcano that exploded back in January. It threw a whole bunch of stuff up into the atmosphere, and there's still aerosols hanging around, and they're giving us these remarkable sunrises and sunsets at the moment. They're truly beautiful. But unfortunately, that haze has made Matariki a little bit difficult to see, but it is actually easy to see now. And actually, there's a really convenient, almost like a celestial signpost to it at the moment, because the planet Venus is very close to it in the sky. So if you go out and you find a view tomorrow morning to if you find a place with a good view to the northeast, you'll see a stonkingly bright object, really quite low, and that's the planet Venus. And then below and to the left of it, you should see the stars of Matariki hanging there. So it's a really great time. We've had a brilliant run of brilliant run of weather this week. Frosty mornings mean it's very cold and icy, but it gives you a lovely clear sky. So I would encourage all of your viewers and your listeners to get out there tomorrow morning and enjoy this brilliant sight, because it's wonderful.
Both you and I are in Dunedin. You're talking about looking to the northeast sky. I'm assuming, part of my ignorance, but because of the vastness of the solar system and the smallness of New Zealand, that wherever you are in the country, it'll still be in the northeast?
Yeah, that's right. Although, because it's interesting. I was doing doing a thing for my daughter's class up in Auckland the other day, and I realised actually, even though New Zealand's a relatively small country, there are considerable changes in the time of sunrise and sunset across the country. So Auckland gets this time of year, they get about an hour more daylight than we do, but of course in summer we get much more daylight than they do, and that's simply because of the latitude, the distance between us and the equator. So having said that, though, Matariki does appear in the northeast wherever you are in the country. It just rises at a slightly different time. Down here in Dunedin, it's about 6:30 in the morning. I think up in Auckland, it's a little bit like 5:30, almost 6 o'clock. So they get to see it a little bit earlier, but they lose it as the sun rises.
I've got another question, actually. Actually, a question based on what you're saying. The name of Pleiades, Matariki, Seven Sisters is first time it's ever occurred to me, Ian. Is Matariki unique in that different cultures have different names for it? Or do pretty much all the star clusters have different names for different cultures? I don't remember this conversation so much. Maybe it's because we're talking about Matariki that it becomes more obvious, but I don't remember this conversation ever really happening before about, oh, in this culture that star's called this and we call it that and they call it that. Is it unique in that, or is this common?
Well, it's fairly common. I mean, I think the key thing about Matariki is it's quite easy to see.
Right.
Nearly all of the stars in the sky have got different names according to different cultures. And the planets too. So I think we've got Kopu, which is Venus, and that's understandable. But I think there are relatively few objects that have got so many names across cultures.
Right.
And I think that's really entirely due to the prominence of Matariki in the sky. It's really quite an obvious thing to look at it. And that's why I think it does have these different names. And of course, it's in a part of the sky that you can see, say, all the way from the North Pole right the way down to almost Antarctica. You can see this cluster of stars.
Wow.
So again, it's got worldwide. You can see it pretty much from the whole planet.
So like everyone could use it as a locating position because everyone can see it. Is what you're saying? Yeah,
that's
so
right.
So it'd be common amongst. So the Southern Cross may not have the same prominence in the Northern Hemisphere to their local Indigenous people around the country because it's a Southern Cross, whereas this is sort of seen by everybody.
Well, that's right. I mean, there are parts of the sky that in the north that we can't see from here. So, for example, I grew up in London, and the Big Dipper, the Great Bear, is one of the most famous constellations in the sky, and that never rises in New Zealand. And here as you've already said, here in New Zealand, we get to see the Southern Cross, and you can't see that from the UK and Northern Europe. Yeah. So there are parts of the sky that different parts of the planet can't see, but because the Pleiades are relatively close to what they call the celestial equator, it can be seen pretty much from the whole planet, and that's why it's such a useful tool for cultures around the world.
I love the idea about sort of natural knowledge. You're talking about how Māori were using it and identifying it as the middle of winter. I sometimes think when I walk out my front door and it's still fairly frosty and I see blossoms coming out on trees, and I kind of go, oh, what's that tree telling us? You know, what is this signifying to us? And I think from what I understand, it's generally signifying that the days have just started to get a little bit longer. We've gone through because the buds need a certain amount of light to then start to produce. And even if it's really cold, you see buds coming out on the trees, it tells you something, because we often think, well, that's a springtime thing, but actually my understanding is it's more of a length of light in the sky type thing. So yeah, I like that. Hey, listen, we should also probably just very quickly say, to let people know, let me bring it up on the screen here, what's happening at the museum tomorrow. If people are in Dunedin, or as I said, if they're outside of Dunedin and they want to have a look online, you've got a dawn ceremony going on. Is that the major event for Matariki tomorrow?
Yeah, that's the kickoff really for the entire city celebration or commemoration of Matariki. So we're up pretty early tomorrow morning. About 7 o'clock things kick off. And it's going to be really beautiful. We've got some amazing projections that are going to go on the front of the museum.
Yep.
And we've invited folks, because part of the cultural tikanga of Matariki is that it's about remembering those who've passed during the last year. So we've actually put out an invitation, and I think we've got nearly 200 images of folks who passed in the last year are going to be projected along with celestial imagery onto the front of the museum from about 7 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, lovely.
And then we're obviously going to have a karakia and go in for some cultural performances inside the museum. And that's all followed by some amazing kai. We've got a great big free breakfast tomorrow morning. Because that's also part of Matariki, the fact that you remember those who've passed, you look forward to the new year, and then you all celebrate with a damn fine feed. Yeah. And I'm sure the museum's bacon butties are up there with the best of them. So I'm quite looking forward to that after a very, very early start tomorrow.
I think, as we all know, having food in a celebration is an essential. It's a part of how we celebrate. People are in Dunedin, they know where the museum is, but people who don't, right by the main entrance to the university, in between the two one-ways, if you're looking to locate it. What is the official address? Because it is on both one-ways, yeah? Is there an official address?
Yeah, it's 419 Great King Street is our address.
There you go.
So 419 Great King. Maps, you should be able to find us. But just look for a building that's full of beautiful pictures and a crowd of people outside. That will be us tomorrow morning.
And then you'll be putting that up, like that event up online afterwards. We'll be able to, people who can't get there can get along to the website, which is, of course, otagomuseum.nz, and have a look at what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And as I say, if you do get a chance to come along tomorrow morning, it's going to be a very, very special day. We've got some brilliant cultural performances, activities across the day. And it was, we did it last year as almost like a dress rehearsal, and it was a fabulous, fabulous day. Well worth getting up. And the drive in from Portobello for me means to get up about 5 o'clock. But on the way, it does mean I get to see Matariki. So I'll be stopping off and, tipping my hat to the cluster as it rises above the harbour tomorrow morning.
Amazing. Director of Otago Museum here in Dunedin, that is Ian Griffin. Ian, thank you for joining us. Really genuinely appreciate your insights.
Oh, great speaking to you, Pat.
Alrighty, so that's Matariki, shall I say, part one. Matariki part one, because I've got another one conversation coming up for you shortly. And I can see that there's a lot of conversations going on in the chat. What I'll do, I'll just play this conversation first, and it's shorter than the one we've just had. And at the end of that, I'll put up some of the messages that have been coming through about all of the topics we've been talking about tonight. As I'm here, though, and just to remind you that we do have a daily audio podcast going on. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Just head there and search for hashtag BHN or Big Hairy News. We were number 12 in the charts. The last time I looked in the last couple of days under the news category. So that's pretty cool, actually. So get yourself along there, do some downloads. Make sure you check out our audio podcast, which is just basically an audio version of what you're hearing tonight. Cool. All right. So that was sort of the conversation around the natural world element, the actual physical part of Matariki and what it was all about. I now want to have a look with Toni Hueta. She's going to tell us about perhaps maybe more the cultural aspect of Matariki, what Matariki means to Māori, what it's about, how it's celebrated, how it's identified. I was interested in the kind of Matariki story. All Indigenous people have sort of stories to explain the natural world, and I wasn't sure what the Matariki story was. So we got Toni on, we had a bit of a quick chat with her, and here is that. Make sure this is full screen. Is that full screen? No, that's full screen now. Okay, we're there. And this is that conversation for you. Then I'll be back afterwards. Keep going in the chat. I see Chewy's still there chatting away with you guys as well. And we'll bring Chewy back at the end of this conversation if he's still with us, and wrap up in just a few minutes. Welcome to the show, Toni Hueta, who is leading the new Solar Tsunami program at Otago Museum. But that program, as I understand it, Toni, is based on research done at Otago University. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. It's run out of the physics department, led by a man named Professor Craig Rogers.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we know Craig. Hey, very cool. Hey, well, it's lovely to have you on board. Thanks for jumping in and joining us. What we really wanted to do, what I want to do, I guess, is one of the things about this is I love being the dumbest person in the room. It's always fun because then you get to learn from other people. Yeah. And I don't know, and I don't think many people probably know too much around what the story of Matariki is for Māori. So, before, Europeans came and before it was put up as a holiday, and before we talked about what I've heard as a planting season, that's honestly about the depth of my knowledge to do there was this acknowledgement of, Pleiades, Matariki coming into the sky. That meant the start of a new year. But as is always, there's often beautiful and wonderful stories around what's going on in the skies, the celestial, beings and stuff. And I really want to understand that a bit more. And I wonder if you can educate me in some of those areas as to what Māori thought Matariki was and what it means culturally to Māori as well.
Yeah, of course. So I don't know everything, but I'm also still on my learning journey. So the name Matariki comes from Ngā mata o te araki Tawhiri translates to the eyes of the god Tawhiri, and it comes from the story of Rangi and Papa being separated, and Tawhiri, the god of the winds, was the only brother that was actually upset about that happening. And when they separated their parents, they turned their father away so that he didn't have to look down on his wife, Papa Tua. And so in order for him to see his wife, Tawhiri, in a fit of rage after fighting his brothers, ripped out his eyes and threw them up onto his back so that he could actually see his wife. And so that's where the name comes from. And those are the eyes of Tawhiri. And that's
that's drastic, isn't it?
It is. It's love of his parents so that they could continue to see each other.
Yep.
Beautiful. And so when he did that, that's why you can never tell where the wind's coming from, because he's a blind god. His eyes are with his father. Yeah. And so Māori would look to Puanga or Puaka, which is the star Rigel in the constellation of Orion, it's his foot, and Matariki for the new year. So just like in the Gregorian calendar, they start their new year at the middle of winter after the shortest day, because after that the days get longer, which is basically bringing in the new year.
Of course, you've just said something straight away that I haven't thought about before. In the Northern Hemisphere, New Year is in the middle of winter. So why would it be any different in the Southern Hemisphere? Love that. Fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we did the same down here in the South. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, which makes sense. As the days get longer, it's the new year. And so Māori would typically look to either Puaka, depending on where they're from, or Puanga, or Matariki. A lot of tribes couldn't see Matariki, so they looked to Puanga instead, but they're connected anyway. And they would, a tohunga, which is a Māori elder, would read the stars. And so they would go out early in the morning, because it's a heliospheric rising, and have a reading of how bright the stars were, or how clear, or how frosty. Right. So there are 9 stars within the Matariki cluster, and they would see how bright they were shining and where they were shining towards as well. And each of those stars represent a realm of the environment. You've got salt water, fresh water, food in the ground, food in the air, the winds, the rain. And so the clarity of those stars would dictate how that particular part of the environment would act towards the people.
Very cool. Okay. So it was like a predictor. It was like I think about, I mean, we've all seen that silly movie, The Groundhog Day, when the groundhog comes out of the thing and looks a certain way, that means what's going to happen in the season. The brightness of the star was the predictor for what was going to happen for those various elements through the next year. That's cool. I like that. Okay. Yeah.
And so they would tell that to the people. And a part of the Matariki event as well is to remember all of our loved ones. So that's called the whakamaumahara. And so they would, and traditionally they would have an earth oven, an umu, and they would do the haratoa ceremony, the haratoa ceremony, and they would cook all of the food from the different realms that the stars represent. And when they uncover that food, that steam would rise and feed the stars, and help them. And as that steam was rising, or if you have a fire, the smoke was rising, you would say your loved ones' names, and they would be carried into the stars.
It's so nice.
Placed in the heavens, yeah.
Well, that's why it's like, you know, we want to. I think it's really important. I mean, I think when we have special days, there's a really good reason to know why we're having these special days. I think for whatever the special day is, public holiday, whatever you want to call it, if people just think of it as a day off work, or hey, cool, day in lieu and time and a half, they miss out on so much of the nuance of why to enjoy it. Yeah, you know. Yeah. That's cool. I like that. I like the remembrance one. And as you say, you know, longer days, new year. Yeah. You know, remembering those before old year, moving forward, new year. Yeah.
And so you can think about it as being in 3 parts: the remembrance ceremony and calling out your loved ones' names, and then looking to the present. So being thankful, being around your whānau, around your friends, saying thanks for being with me here today. Thank you for being alive. We've lost so many this year, but we're thankful to be here. And then looking to the future and placing your hopes and dreams into Hiwa Itirangi, which is one of the which is one of the stars who holds on to your future aspirations.
And whilst this has been somewhat a forgotten day in New Zealand society for probably the past 100 years, have local iwi and local tribes, has it still been a celebratory day? Like, for example, 10 years ago, before we even started to talk about Matariki, I mean, I was on board when I heard we have another public holiday, of course, especially if it's a New Zealand, you know, focused one. But, you know, 10 years ago when this conversation wasn't happening, is this time of year, were there celebrations going on Marae? Were there things happening? Were there people reenacting these sort of ceremonies as well?
Yep. And so heaps of iwi have done this for years. So I'm from Central North Island, small town called Raitahi, which is really close to Ohakune, and we would go up the mountain for our maunga puanga ceremony. And our koro, or our nanny, or now our Uncle Che leads our karakia, and we've been doing it for years, and I know that's the same for many iwi,
I think that's so cool. I feel like as a 40-something-year-old, you know, Kiwi bloke, that I've missed out on something for my existence in this country so far. And I'm so glad that we've got it now and that we can learn a bit more about the origins of it to then actually see it be, not just celebrated by Māori iwi, because it's their tradition, but it gets brought into the tradition for the whole country and we can all get out there and enjoy. I mean, there's nothing like, I grew up in the Catholic Church, there's things like All Saints Day and All Souls Day, and you can remember your past people there. There's nothing stopping any person turning this into the celebration that you've just described, which is wicked.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Awesome, yeah. And it's like you said, like it's not just for Māori, it's for all of us. And now that it is a public holiday and it's the first Indigenous public holiday, we can all celebrate it together and learn all together. I'm so proud of New Zealand.
I guess the last thing to know is we talked to Ian a bit about the natural world, the constellations and stuff, but obviously this was significant in the natural world for Māori at the time as well. It indicated a change in season, it indicated something was going to happen. So back in the day, what would now happen for Māori once New Year's, like what would they physically get into? Am I right when I said I have heard about it being a planting season? Was it something that indicated new activity happening, in the whare? What went on the days after?
So it signified the end of the hunting season. So it would be a sign to store all of their food. So they had amazing ways of storing their food. And if you're interested, I highly recommend going online and having a research of it, because it was just very clever ways of like storing the protein inside jars full of fat, or like harakeke full of fat, so that it preserves it a lot better. So they would preserve all of their food that they had hunted throughout the year and all the berries that they've caught, and hunker down for the season, make sure that they had enough food to last them until they go out and hunt again. And they would go out firstly in those rounds that the tohunga said would be plentiful.
It's amazing. This has been a lovely conversation, Tony, and I'm so glad you managed to find a few minutes for us to talk about it today. I'm very excited to learn more about this, and I hope, I know there's a lot going on. We've already talked to Ian about what's happening at the museum tomorrow. There's a lot going on around the country. I hope that those of us who don't know too much about the origins or history of Matariki use the next day to learn more about it, but then the forthcoming years as well. You know, as you say, even though there's Waitangi Day, it does feel like kind of New Zealand's first public holiday based on, just only what's in this land. There's no external forces attributing to this holiday at all. It's just from what's in this land and on this land. Hey, Tony Huerta, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. And mate, have a good time tomorrow morning. I'm sure it'll be an early one for you and it'll be a big party day, but I look forward to, I might even get the kids up and we might pop down to the museum as well, just to see what's going on there in the morning. Yeah. So thank you again. And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you very much.
All right, there you go. Matariki, the natural world. Matariki, perhaps, can we call it the spiritual world? Chewy, you still with us, mate?
Yep, still here. I found that fascinating, both parts.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Let's just have a look at a couple of messages that have been coming. I see you've been going hard in the paint. David says of an earlier conversation, a bit late here, but I thought we'd just say about the housing market. It will be slightly easier to get a mortgage from July 7th with easing of the rules. It might be easier to get, but it'll probably still cost you way more. I'm assuming that's the loan to value ratio, the LVR. I haven't heard that's changing, but that's probably what David's talking about. Now on the trans athletes, so when we started, Chewy, we were like, well, let's just skip over this, and I'll do a deep dive over the weekend. And
we skip over anything.
Yeah, it's true, actually. What does Kim say? Kim says, I think most of the focus of the mainstream media trans issues is elite sport. That's something that's very true as well, because we hear a lot about, like in the conversation that we didn't play from the TVNZ, the academic was saying sports is a human right. I don't know if I agree with that. I think about human rights as kind of inalienable rights. I got that word wrong. I think that no one's taking sports away from anyone with these discriminatory lines, right? No one's stopping you playing golf if you're 34, but they might stop you playing masters golf because you're not 35 yet. So that's the thing about elite sport and sport. No one's being stopped to play sport, but potentially with this new FINA rule, some are going to be stopped to playing elite sport. And again, this muscle mass thing, if you are transitioning and you're an average woman on the street, trans woman on the street, you are going to lose muscle mass by taking estrogen. The difference is if you continue to train, You won't. So this is the conversation. We shouldn't be comparing what happens to elite athletes who train 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day to your average person on the street. I mean, Valerie Adams is one of the most impressive human beings I've ever seen in my life when it comes to physical strength and stuff. She would whip any of our asses in a heartbeat. But if you put Valerie Adams up against the number one shot putter male in the world, there'd be a big difference. So, but compared to me, I'm a twig compared to Valerie Adams. So it's that's what we got to, that's part of the conversation about apples with apples. Simple says, I feel the best way forward is to recognise all groups by adding new categories to be inclusive. This will end up having male, female, trans female. And look, I also understand that. But look, this is what I'm saying about how many use this as a sharp tool to poke and prod. That's not what I want to do, because I can also acknowledge in that much like with marriage, right? Same-sex marriage equality, the same with the gay and lesbian community didn't want to have a different title. They didn't want to have civil unions. They wanted marriage. They wanted the same. So I can also acknowledge in that I can see that there'll be a problem with that. If someone identifies as a woman, then they'll want to play in women's sport. So I get it. No one's saying. And I think Chewy, you said it, that there's no easy answer here, and there's not. But I think what there needs to be is honest conversations, and I feel like potentially from all areas of this conversation, it's either there's not honest conversations coming out, or it's this thing about, and I don't want to bang on about this, it's that the language that's being used needs to be sort of agreed to. Like, Chewy, if you and I were having an argument, and you know how sometimes probably not you, Chewy, you're probably a brilliant husband. Hopefully your wife won't come in and beat you up again like we just heard her doing.
She did ask me to say that she's never threatened to stab me.
Good, okay.
Just before.
I'm sure you've never had a disagreement over a word with your wife. But often we'll get into an argument and we're going, but that's not what I mean. And then at the end of the argument, you kind of go, oh, shit, we probably didn't need to have an argument here because we were actually talking about different things. I think that's happening in this conversation somewhat. Yeah,
I mean, any conversation around this, because I mean, I've had almost this exact same conversation with a workmate of mine around this, and he is definitely one, I think, very similar to yourself. He takes in a lot of points of view. He considers the right and the left, all of that sort of thing, and he keeps on coming back to the same thing. And I just tense up because I'm like,
I get it.
You know, I want people to feel that they can be the people that they want to be, and I don't like it when people punch down on them and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a catch-all, and then you come to something that is quite outside of that. So, you know, you should be able to get a job, whether you're straight, gay, cisgendered, transgendered. That's all good. But then you get to elite level sport, it's not the real world. So I struggle with that conversation sometimes,
and I get it, and
I'm not invested.
Yeah,
and I don't follow
possibly a lot of people will struggle with it because they want to be pricks. They don't want to come across like pricks. And we all, I mean, all you need to do is Google my name with the word LGBT beside it. You'll see I'm a massive ally. I lost work and friends and all sorts of stuff fighting for marriage equality. I'm in, but it doesn't mean necessarily I'm going to just sit back and go, this makes logical sense, so I'm on board. Yep. It's like it's in family and whānau, you're allowed to have disagreements and try and nut it out. And that's actually my heart, is to nut this fucking thing out. Because I mean, like, I think that I think I agree with everything you're saying. There's nothing, I'll call you whatever you want. I'll use whatever pronoun you want if I can understand, not even if I can understand it, but, you know, the pronoun thing is an interesting one, but it doesn't faze me from a position of, you know, if someone wants to call themselves something, that's 100% fine. Do what you want, live your best life. I'll love you as you are. It's not an issue, right? But that also doesn't still mean, unless I'm going to say this like a fact, because I think it probably is, but I might be wrong, but I'll say it like a fact for the argument, that it doesn't necessarily mean that trans women don't have an advantage competing against biological women. And the thing is, and we had this conversation the other night, Chewy, and we didn't talk about the trans issues, but it's a part of it. We had a conversation around tribalism. And we had Bryce Edwards on talking about the political tribalism, but we talked a little bit about societal tribalism. and this is an area of conversation where you do sometimes get the, not even the feeling, but the overt statements that if you're not 100% on board with everything I say, then you're my enemy. And that's not the real world. You know, we can love and accept and want full inclusion and all those sorts of things, but still kind of go, this area here, we don't quite see eye to eye in. Fine.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, and a mature adult conversation, if I'm 99% on board with everything you want and there's 1% where we have a disagreement or we need to figure it out, that doesn't mean I'm against you. It doesn't mean I'm put whatever word you want at the start of this, ending it with phobe. You know, it doesn't mean any of those things. It means that I will fight for your rights to have every right in society that I have. I have done it. I've got the receipts, as the kids say, to show that I've done it. Just look at some of my writings on my blog. I've been there, I've done that. I will continue to do that. It doesn't mean we have to get into lockstep on every issue if there's things we're still trying to figure out. And I think it's okay. And I'm actually okay to put my head above the parapet. Chewy, you said it makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable, but I'm aware that there might be some flack that comes with it. But I'm okay with that.
And look, it makes me uncomfortable. Sometimes it's good to be uncomfortable because it does. It makes you sort of like, I mean, I'm someone that tends to make quite snap decisions at times.
Yeah.
Right. But that doesn't mean that I entrench myself in those points of view and go, no, this is my position and it will never change. Sometimes confronting what you believe in is uncomfortable and good stuff comes out of it. Yeah. You know, it's such a conversation that I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to do damage. I am not a trans person. I'm not a sports person, so I don't feel very qualified to comment. But if there is someone that is listening to us that is in either of those camps, I would value your opinion much higher than I value my own on this subject at this stage. You know,
and that's what I'm with you.
What more can you ask?
Well, I'm with you in the whole. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings either. And like I've always been confused. Like there is and I might have talked about this person before. There's she's a sexologist, but she's got some official PhD qualifications in the area of, you know, human anatomy and sex. Her name's Deborah So. She's quite a controversial figure, but she has her research and she, you know, has her writings in that, and many on the right use them as a weapon. And it makes me uncomfortable that something I may say which isn't a weapon, it's a genuine conversation and questioning, could be used as a weapon. I don't like that idea. So that gives me, I have two options then: to shut the fuck up, or to acknowledge that if you want to know what I think, then come and talk to me and we'll talk it out.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
but what I won't do, and I'm not in this position to do this, is like Deborah So will go on, like what's the name of that guy who was on Fox News with the blackboard, and he's got the white goatee now. He's got a Blaze TV, the Blaze TV guy. So she goes on that right-wing show and she talks about transgender women. She talks about she talks about her, and she uses the transgender woman's name, not her dead name, just her name. And the host goes, "Oh, you call them she?" And she goes, "Yeah, well, of course," because she's actually quite liberal in her views. And the host of this right-wing session goes, "No, I wouldn't do that." I'm like, "Well, that's because you're a cunt." You know, it's like but that's what I'm saying. It's like that's where this conversation can be weaponized by the right. And unfortunately, because it's been weaponized by the right, it's shut down healthy conversation in society. That's why you're uncomfortable, because it's been weaponized by the right. And if you say the wrong thing, then even if you make a mistake, then you're a transphobe. And I'm just, it's unfortunate.
As you said, I think the majority of people generally don't want to be dickheads. They don't want to upset people. They don't want to make people feel bad. But then you've got the people that don't give a shit about that, or even worse, really do want to be fucking bastards about it. And they've got such loud voices, and they tend to be bloody everywhere. Yeah. And especially online, when you can hide behind your anime avatar or Pepe the Frog or whatever, and just say dead name them, that woman's got a penis, all of the vile stuff that you see online.
Yeah. No, look,
it's the perception that they're everywhere because they've got nothing but time to post in comment sections.
But I'll tell you something, if someone wants to throw down and challenge me, I have no problems with that, but do it to me. I'll engage. You know, in fact, one of the things we're thinking about doing, Chewy, depending on, you know, how much longer we can do this for, is installing some telephone lines. Imagine tonight if we had telephone lines, bro, and opening up the phone lines to let people participate as well. It's something that we're considering, but you know, it's a few $1,000s to do that, and we are not yet having the sponsor coming on board to pay for all of that.
As someone that has prank called radio stations before, am I able to prank call myself?
Yeah, of course you are. Hey, look, there's like another 15 messages coming. We haven't even got to these yet. Let's do these quickly. We're going to be here till midnight, brother. Seems a weird dichotomy where some folks don't want people to transition while young, but also extend the wait time for trans athletes before competing. Athletes aren't the young anyway. Yeah, and that point was made today in that conversation that in lots of places around the world, you don't have kind of the right to transition before you're 18. But as you were saying before, some of these athletic organisations are saying if you go through puberty, it's going to change the rules. So it's kind of basically saying you're not going to be able to do it because we want to be inclusive with the rules. These are the rules, but the rules don't fit into that society. So that's a point that's been made. Also, important to remember that biological sex is considered to have a bimodal distribution, less two strict categories and more two general categories to lump some traits. Cis women aren't all the same. Yeah. Is that talking about people having natural advantage? I guess maybe it is.
Yeah. I think so.
Neon Mammals, who was one of the guys, asked about when we tried to have a call-in show in lockdown. We did that on Zoom, and guess I just got a whole bunch of penises being put up in front of my live stream. So we took that down quite quickly. I think we're done. I see you guys still chatting away in there, but it's everybody saying things to each other. So we don't think we'll do anything more. Dude, this was going to be a fairly short show, and it's 11:36 p.m. 39
Here we are, hour and a half into our 1 hour show. I'll only need you for half hour.
Yes, hey, well, it's because you chose to stay, and respectfully, I said to you, you can go now, and you said, no, I'm going to stay. So,
since we're talking about prank calls, I will tell you a quick story about one of them, and I'll demonstrate what I did there. You know, this has been a really good conversation before I get to it, and I've just got one last thing that I want to bring.
That would be the end of Chewy. All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. Remember, we do have an audio podcast going on every single day, so I'll get off this, I'll rip the audio, I'll put it onto Apple Podcasts. It goes up on Google Podcasts as well now, Spotify in there as well. If you've missed the start of the show, if you missed the end of the show, if you're out and you don't catch a show, obviously you can get all the stuff on demand, which is video on YouTube and all that. But if you're if you're like me and you'd rather just sort of listen to something, that's for Chewy. I'm just scratching my cheek for Chewy, that one there. If you're like me and you like to listen to things, then just go and subscribe. As I said, during the week we were number 12 out of 100 already, which is gratifying. So if you're subscribed to us and you listen to us, thank you for that. All we got to do is get to number 1 by knocking off Leighton Smith. Like that's going to happen. But then you can have us in your pocket when you're driving to work, or Bluetooth us to your car stereo, and it's an easy way to listen to what we've got. And now that we're doing the audio podcast, I think I'm being careful to more describe what we're putting on the screen as well. You might hear me say from now on, if you're listening to us, what's on the screen is da-dun. So that's specifically for the audio podcast. All right, team. Hey, thanks, guys. Have a really awesome Matariki. I am going to be celebrating with my whānau. I might even go down to the museum at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, although that's in 7.5 hours. Maybe not. We'll see. But it's going to be fun. Own it. You know, I don't want to hear any of this talk about, it's not a holiday for us, like so many people do around Waitangi Day. It is your holiday. Matariki is New Zealand's first kind of public holiday. You can look to Waitangi Day, but that has kind of a history based in our relationship with the Crown, whereas this is based on our relationship with the earth and the sky that we have here in this land. So celebrate it. Do something, man. I remember I used to do when I was working in radio, I used to push this thing called the Waitangi Day barbecue. I did it for about 3 years in a row with Facebook page and stuff, and just really challenge people to do something to celebrate the day. You know, to not buy into all the naysayers. And I don't know if there are naysayers around Matariki. I don't feel like I've heard much of that, but there probably is. But if there are naysayers out there, just choose to celebrate it. Do something, you know. When I used to live in Auckland, we used to have a Waitangi Day barbecue. What is it right now in Dunedin? probably 3 or 2 degrees. It's -3, according to my computer over there. So wherever's reading the temperature from, probably the airport, it's -3 in Dunedin right now. So maybe not barbecue weather, but certainly a nice meal, a nice celebration. Put on some good Kiwi music on Spotify after you listen to the podcast, and do something. Just do something small to acknowledge the day. It's our first New Zealand only public holiday, and enjoy it. And we will see you Monday night from 10 p.m. for another edition. This is our second longest show after that lunatic right winger in America, which was great fun as well. And remember, follow us on YouTube, because even though I did say at the start of this where we're just going to do a cursory touch over the transgender and sport rulings change, and I was going to do more of a deep dive over the weekend by myself, I still probably will do that, but I feel like we've also put out a lot of information tonight, so maybe that's sort of also been done. But if you follow us on YouTube, you'll get notified, or me on Twitter, you'll get notified if I do that special over the weekend, that individual singular clip. You'll get notified when it's done, and you can have a look at it and go from there. All right, I've got a sore throat. Not the dirty C word sore throat, just from talking too much. So I'm off out of here. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you next time for another edition of Big Hairy News. Happy Matariki, and we'll see you on Monday.